My $8,500 wedding cake was completely destroyed, but it was the best money I ever spent.
Why?
Because lying amidst that bright red mess was my own sister about to fall into a deep sleep. She had intentionally drugged me right at my wedding to turn me into a drunken mess in front of my wealthy in-laws. I let her have her way, but at a much higher price. A gentle glass swap, a fake smile, and the result was the most satisfying side of my life. My precious sister collapsing amidst the crumbs of red velvet. But to understand why my own sister wanted to ruin my big day, I have to take you back through the preparation process. I was Pamela, 29 years old, working as a marketing director at a prestigious firm in Charleston, and I had always prided myself on being self-possessed and logical. My younger sister, Sutton, 27, was what she called an influencer, which was a fancy word for unemployed and living a virtual life on social media. What she didn't advertise to her 12,000 followers was the $51,000 in credit card debt she had been hiding from our parents. My parents, Conrad and Blythe, had always favored Sutton. Always. It defied all logic, all reason, all fairness. I could bring home straight A's, scholarships, job promotions. Didn't matter. Sutton could post a selfie with a motivational quote stolen from Pinterest, and Mother would frame it. Sutton's jealousy reached its absolute peak when I got engaged to Sterling. Sterling was an orthopedic surgery resident at the medical university. Brilliant and kind, with hands that can reconstruct shattered bones and a smile that makes my heart skip. But what really sent Sutton into a spiral wasn't his career or his character. It was his last name. Sterling comes from old Charleston money, the kind of family whose ancestors signed important documents and had ships named after them. The kind of family that still gets invited to garden parties at historic estates. The kind of family Sutton desperately wanted access to. During the wedding preparations, she turned into an absolute nightmare. It started 3 months before the wedding. I was sitting in my apartment reviewing vendor contracts when Sutton showed up unannounced. She walked in wearing yoga pants that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget and carrying a designer handbag I knew she couldn't afford. "I've been thinking," she announced, not bothering with, "Hello. I should be your maid of honor." I looked up from my spreadsheet. "Sutton, I already asked Adeline, your lawyer friend." She wrinkled her nose like she'd smelled something rotten. "Pamela, this is a wedding with old money elements. Do you really want someone who wears pantsuits to everything, standing next to you in photos that will be in the society pages? Adeline is my best friend. She's been there for me through everything. And I'm your sister." Sutton's voice took on that whiny edge I knew too well, your only sister. What will people think if your own flesh and blood isn't your maid of honor? It'll look like we're estranged. It'll look bad for both of us. Besides, I need this.
Pamela.
Do you know how good this will be for my brand? A wedding at the historic Charleston Hotel with Sterling's family. I could gain thousands of followers. I should have said no.
Right?
Then I should have held my ground. But then she called Mother. 2 hours later, both our parents showed up at my door. Mother was already dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, and Father wore his disappointed expression, the one he'd perfected over decades of making me feel guilty for existing. "Pamela, sweetheart," Mother said, taking my hands in hers. "Sutton is devastated. Absolutely devastated. She feels like you don't love her." "That's not. I never said that. I just wanted your sister is going through a difficult time right now." Father interrupted, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he'd used when the discussion was over before it began. "The least you can do is include her in your special day. Make her feel valued. Just indulge your sister," Mother added, squeezing my hands. "Don't make her sad. It's one day, Pamela. Surely you can be generous for one day." The manipulation was textbook. They'd been doing this my entire life, making Sutton's feelings my responsibility, her happiness my burden.
"Fine."
I said the word tasted like ashes. "You can be the maid of honor." Sutton squealed and clapped her hands. Mother beamed. Father nodded approvingly. Adeline, when I called to break the news, was silent for a long moment. "Then are you sure about this, Pam?"
"No."
I admitted. "But it's easier than fighting them all. Easier isn't always better." She was right. Of course. But I'd already made my first mistake. I'd already nodded in agreement. I didn't know then that this concession had paved the way for Sutton's most vicious plot. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sutton texted me. "I need you to pay for my bridesmaid dress. I'm a little short this month." The dress she'd chosen without consulting me was an $1,800 silk gown from a boutique that required appointments and served champagne during fittings. When I'd suggested more affordable options for the bridesmaids, she'd actually laughed. "You're marrying into old money, Pamela. We can't look cheap in the photos. What would Sterling's family think?" I transferred the money. I didn't even argue. Looking back now, standing in that ballroom with the knowledge of what she'd planned to do to me, I can see it all clearly. Every demand, every manipulation, every time our parents made me swallow my needs to feed her ego, it had all been leading to this moment. Sutton didn't just want to be part of my wedding. She wanted to destroy it. And I almost let her. The Charleston Historic Hotel ballroom was a vision of Southern elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over round tables, dressed in ivory silk, each centerpiece a cascade of white roses and trailing ivy. The hardwood floors gleamed, reflecting the glow of hundreds of candles at the far end of the room. On a table of its own stood the centerpiece that had cost me more than most people's monthly rent. The wedding cake, 6 tiers of red velvet perfection, each layer wrapped in ivory fondant and decorated with edible gold leaf that caught the light like scattered stars, handmade sugar flowers, peonies, roses, gardenias cascaded down one side in a breathtaking display of the baker's artistry. It cost $8,500, and it was absolutely worth every penny. Though not for the reasons I'd originally thought, I sat at the head table, positioned exactly where I'd specified in my carefully drawn seating chart. As a marketing director, I understand the power of image, the importance of angles, the way a photograph can tell a story or destroy a reputation. I'd spent hours planning the setup. Sterling sat to my left, devastatingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his hand warm over mine on the white tablecloth. To my right sat Sutton, poured into a champagne-colored silk gown that probably cost more than she'd admit. Her hair in an elaborate up.
2.
That must have taken hours. Next to Sterling was David, his best friend and head groomsman. A cardiologist with an easy smile and the kind of steady presence that made him perfect for the role. I'd instructed the hotel staff specifically on this arrangement. Husband on the left meant that in almost every captured moment of us as a couple, we'd be facing each other. My facial angle would always be flattering. The lighting would catch my features perfectly. I thought I'd planned for everything. In front of each of us sat identical crystal champagne flutes provided by the hotel.
No ingravinos, no distinguishing marks.
They caught the candlelight, the bubbles rising in perfect golden streams through the expensive vintage Sterling's family had gifted for the toast. The main course had just been cleared away. Herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables plated like art. The staff moved efficiently between tables, the soft clink of cutlery and china creating a sophisticated symphony. Conversation hummed around us, punctuated by bursts of laughter from Sterling's college friends at table 7. Sterling leaned close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "Did you see Uncle Richard trying to flirt with your great Aunt Miriam? I think he's had too much wine." I turned completely to my left to look at him. Laughing, my body rotating to face my new husband in my peripheral vision, I caught movement to my right. Sutton's hand. Her hand moved across the table with practiced smoothness, reaching as if to adjust my place card, which had shifted slightly askew during dinner. A perfectly innocent gesture, helpful even. But as her palm glided over my champagne flute, it tilted just slightly. The colorless liquid from the tiny glass vial she held in her palm fell into my glass and dissolved instantly into the bubbles. The carbonation hit everything. No color change, no residue, nothing to indicate that anything had changed. She pulled her hand back quickly, repositioning my place card with a satisfied little smile. She thought no one saw, but Sutton had forgotten about Adeline, my best friend since law school, sat at the VIP table directly across from us, positioned with a perfect view of the head table. While Sutton had been so focused on me, on Sterling, on making sure we didn't notice her little trick. She'd completely overlooked the woman with the criminal defense lawyer's eye for detail and the instincts of someone who'd spent years studying how people commit crimes. Adeline had seen everything: the gliding hand, the falling liquid, Sutton's smirk, my phone lying face up on the table next to my champagne flute.
Buzzed. Buzzed.
The sound was subtle, lost in the ambient noise of 200 guests celebrating. But I felt it. I saw the screen light up with an incoming message. I glanced down, and iMessage from Adele in 5 short words, all in capitals. Swap glasses. She drugged it. My heart stopped. Actually stopped, then started again with a painful thud that I felt in my throat, my chest, my fingertips. The world tilted slightly. The chandelier lights suddenly too bright. The sounds around me suddenly too loud. I froze. Every muscle in my body locking into place. But years of client presentations, of high-stakes meetings, of maintaining composure when campaigns crashed or executives panicked. All of that training kicked in. My face remained calm, neutral, perhaps a touch concerned, as any bride might be reading a text during her reception, but nothing more. I glanced up slowly, carefully catching Madeline's eye across the room. She gave me the smallest nod, decisive, certain she'd seen it. She was sure. I looked down at the champagne flute in front of me. The golden liquid sparkled innocently, bubbles still rising in those perfect streams. It looked exactly like Sterling's glass, exactly like David's, exactly like Sutton's. But it wasn't. This was no longer ordinary sibling jealousy. This wasn't Sutton throwing a tantrum or making demands or crying to our parents. This was a calculated, targeted attack designed to ruin my reputation in front of my husband's family. She'd planned this, had waited for the perfect moment. She wanted me to drink that glass. Wanted me to become disoriented, confused, sloppy. Wanted Sterling's family, the prestigious old money family she was so obsessed with, to see me make a fool of myself, to see their new daughter-in-law as a drunk, as someone unfit for their son. Someone who couldn't handle her alcohol at her own wedding. The people-pleaser in me, the one who'd spent 29 years swallowing my feelings and accommodating Sutton's tantrums and nodding when our parents demanded I make her happy. That version of Pamela died in that moment. I knew I had to act. I had to swap the glasses, somehow turn Sutton's plan back on her. But she was right there, less than 2 feet away. Her attention fixed on both champagne flutes like a hawk watching prey. I sat frozen in my chair, hyper-aware of every detail, the weight of my phone in my hand, the condensation forming on the outside of the poisoned champagne flute, the sound of Sutton's breathing beside me, quick and excited, anticipating her victory. She was watching those glasses. Both of them. I couldn't move. I couldn't act. Not while her eyes were on them. I needed an opportunity, a distraction. I sat there, heart pounding, waiting. Sterling squeezed my hand, mistaking my tension for wedding day. Nerves. You okay? He murmured. Perfect. I managed the lie smooth and practiced. And then fate sent me the most powerful woman I'd ever met. I heard it, the click of heels on hardwood, expensive heels. The kind that cost more than some people's car payments. The sound came from behind us. From the direction of the VIP waiting room, a private space the hotel had designated for immediate family to use for touch-ups and moments of quiet. The door opened. Mrs. Eleanor stepped out. Sterling's mother was a force of nature contained in a 5'6" frame. Her Oscar de la Renta gown, navy silk with intricate beading that probably cost more than my car, fit her perfectly. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant chignon. Diamond earrings caught the light. She'd clearly been touching up her makeup. Her lips now a fresh shade of classic red. She walked along the back of our row of chairs, her path taking her directly behind the head table. Click, click, click. The sound of her heels was distinctive in the brief lull between courses, audible over the soft conversation. I felt Sutton stiffen beside me. If there was one thing my sister couldn't resist, it was an opportunity to impress someone important. And Mrs. Eleanor was the most important person at this wedding. The matriarch of a family whose name appeared on buildings and scholarship funds, whose opinion could open doors or close them forever. Sutton's head whipped around so fast I'm surprised she didn't get whiplash. She practically leaped from her chair, stepping directly into Mrs. Eleanor's path with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever seeing its owner after a long day. "Oh," Mrs. Eleanor Sutton's voice went up, an octave dripping with manufactured sweetness. Were you resting in the VIP room? 2. I hope the reception isn't too overwhelming for you. I know these events can be absolutely exhausting, especially with so many people wanting your attention. She turned her back completely to the table.
To me.
To the glasses in my head. Madeline's text blazed like neon swap glasses. This was it. My only chance. My hands moved to the bases of both champagne flutes. My fingers were steady. Years of handling, delicate presentation materials had given me precision I'd never appreciated until this moment. I didn't lift the glasses. That would be too obvious to noticeable. Even with Sutton's back turned. Someone might see a guest, a server, even Sterling, if he happened to glance down. Instead, I slid them. Meanwhile, my sister's voice echoed behind me. I must say, Sutton continued, not waiting for a response. Reaching out to lightly touch the sleeve of Mrs. Eleanor's gown. This Oscar de la Renta dress was absolutely born for you. The beading. The cut. It's perfection. You have the most incredible eye for fashion. I was just telling Pamela earlier how elegant you looked. Simply elegant. The silk tablecloth was perfect for this. Expensive. Smooth. With just enough friction to control the movement, but not enough to resist it. I applied gentle pressure to the bases of both glasses, pushing my drugged glass toward Sutton's position while simultaneously pulling her clean glass toward mine. They glided across the fabric like figure skaters on ice, moving just 1 millimeter above the surface. The liquid inside barely rippling.
Swish.
I rotated the new glass slightly in my position, turning it so the faint lipstick mark Sutton had left on the rim faced away from where she'd been sitting. The entire process took 5 seconds, exactly the time it took Sutton to finish her effusive compliment about the dress and start in on how much she admired Mrs. Eleanor's philanthropic work with the Children's Hospital. No one noticed. The servers were at the far end of the ballroom. The guests were engaged in their own conversations. Sterling was watching his Uncle Richard, who had indeed cornered my great-aunt Miriam near the bar. But Adeline noticed. I glanced toward the VIP table. She was holding her wine glass, but her eyes were on me. When our gazes met, the corner of her mouth lifted in the smallest smile. She raised her glass fractionally, a toast only I could see. My network of allies had worked perfectly, and I knew with absolute certainty that Adeline wouldn't take her eyes off my sister for the rest of the night. She'd watch. She'd document. She'd be ready. Mrs. Eleanor extracted herself from Sutton's attention with the practiced grace of someone who'd been handling social climbers for decades. How kind of you to say so, dear. If you'll excuse me, I should return to my table. She glided away, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in her wake. Sutton turned back to her seat and practically bounced into her chair. Her face flushed with triumph. She thought she'd just secured major points with my mother-in-law. Thought she'd had a successful networking moment. That would definitely be worth an Instagram story later. She glanced at the table. The 2 champagne flutes sat exactly as they had before she turned around. Same positions, same fullness, same innocent sparkle of golden bubbles. Her eyes flicked to them briefly, then away. No suspicion, no concern. Why would there be? They looked identical. And her overconfidence. Her absolute certainty that she'd outsmarted me, that her plan was flawless, had killed any instinct to double-check. She reached for the glass in front of her. Now the drugged one. Her smile was toxic, triumphant. Come now, she said, lifting the crystal flute toward me. Let's toast to your happiness, Pamela. I raised my clean glass, forcing my face into a smile that I filled with hidden meaning. Every ounce of satisfaction, every bit of delayed justice, every year of being told to accommodate her. I put it all into that smile. Thank you, sister, I said softly. To a night we cannot forget. The crystal flutes met with a clear, pure chime that rang out across our section of the table.
Clink.
Sutton brought the glass to her lips and drank deeply. Her eyes locked on mine over the rim. She thought she was watching her plan unfold. Thought she was seeing the beginning of my downfall. I sipped my clean champagne and watched her drink her own sentence. The colorless liquid melatonin, whatever dose she'd prepared for me, slid down her throat with the expensive vintage champagne. She set her glass down with a satisfied sigh, still smiling. I smiled back and waited. After the toast, I made my move. I had to sell this. I had to make Sutton believe her plan was working exactly as she designed it. So I went quiet. I turned slightly away from the table. Conversation let my smile fade into something more neutral, more subdued. When Sterling asked me a question about the dessert service timing, I answered in soft, vague terms. When David tried to include me in a joke about the worst wedding speeches they'd witnessed in medical school, I managed only a weak laugh. Sutton noticed immediately. I could feel her eyes on me. I could sense the way. She leaned slightly closer, studying my face for signs of the drugs taking effect. I gave her what she wanted, a bride growing quieter, a little disconnected, slightly unfocused. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. She thought it was working. Thought I was beginning to feel the effects of the melatonin. That in a few more minutes I'd be stumbling, slurring, making a spectacle of myself in front of 200 guests and Sterling's entire family. She sat back in her chair, practically vibrating with excitement, her confidence growing with every passing minute. But what Sutton didn't realize, what her self-absorption wouldn't let her see, was that the drugs were in her system now being absorbed into her bloodstream. Beginning their journey toward her brain, the MC's voice crackled through the sound system, smooth and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite the best man to say a few words. The ballroom quieted, conversations trailing off as guests turned their attention to the small stage area near the cake table. David stood, buttoning his jacket with an easy grin. I checked the time. The evening was running precisely on schedule. Just past 8 o'clock. He made his way to the microphone, and for the next several minutes, he had the entire room laughing. Stories about Sterling's terrible cooking in their shared apartment during residency. The time Sterling had accidentally worn mismatched shoes to a formal hospital presentation. The moment David had known Sterling was serious about me because he'd started actually doing his laundry instead of buying new clothes when he ran out of clean ones. The timing was perfect. David's speech created a buffer, a period where all attention was focused elsewhere, where the subtle changes beginning to happen in Sutton's body would go unnoticed in the darkened ballroom. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She was still smiling, still playing her part as the supportive maid of honor. But I saw it the way she shifted slightly in her seat, the way her hand came up to touch her temple briefly, the small crease that formed between her eyebrows. The melatonin was starting to work. Liquid melatonin acts faster than pills, absorbing quickly into the bloodstream. Sutton would be feeling it now, a subtle heaviness in her limbs, a gentle fuzziness creeping into her thoughts. But she would mistake it for nervousness about her upcoming speech, or perhaps the champagne hitting a little harder than expected. She'd never suspect the truth. David finished his speech to enthusiastic applause and returned to his seat, clapping Sterling on the shoulder as he passed. Sterling stood to hug his best friend, and the two of them shared a moment that made the photographer's camera flash repeatedly. The mic returned to the microphone. "Thank you, David. And now we'd love to hear from the maid of honor." The moment arrived. Sutton stood. I watched her carefully, remembering every detail, the way she had to steady herself briefly with a hand on the table, the slight pause before she stepped away from her chair, as if gathering her coordination, the forced brightness in her expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. She thought it was nerves. I thought it was the natural anxiety of public speaking, but I knew better. The drugs were taking hold, creating that characteristic lightheaded sensation, making her limbs feel heavy and disconnected. In another 10 minutes, she'd be fighting to keep her eyes open. But right now, in this moment, she still had enough clarity, enough diluted confidence to believe she was in control. She walked toward the stage area, her steps perhaps a fraction slower than normal, but still steady enough, and she headed straight for the spot she'd probably planned for days right next to the cake tower. Of course she did. The $8,500 red velvet masterpiece, with its edible gold leaf and handmade sugar flowers, would be the perfect backdrop for the photos she'd post later. The expensive cake would signal wealth, status, connection to old money. It would be visible proof that she'd made it, that she was part of this world. She positioned herself as close to the cake table as possible, probably closer than the catering staff would have liked. Her left hand held a newly refilled wine glass, and her right hand accepted the wireless microphone from the mic. The microphone, that beautiful, treacherous wireless microphone that would broadcast every word to the entire ballroom through the sophisticated sound system. Sterling's family had paid extra for.
Sutton didn't think about that.
Didn't consider what might happen if she lost control of her words. If the drugs in her system made her truth-telling and uninhibited. She just smiled at the crowd and began to speak. "Good evening, everyone," she started, her voice amplified perfectly through the speakers. "For those who don't know me, I'm Sutton, Pamela's sister and her maid of honor." Her words were still clear, still controlled, but I could see the effort it took. The way she stood just a little too still, like someone trying not to sway. I've known Pamela my entire life, obviously, and I have to say, she paused for effect, playing to the crowd. It's been quite a journey watching her find someone worthy of her. Polite laughter from the guests. Pamela has always been the responsible one, the organized one, the one with the perfect plans and the perfect career. There was an edge to her voice now, something sharp hiding beneath the saccharine sweetness. And now she has the perfect husband from the perfect family. I sat below the stage, my hand finding Sterling's and squeezing tight. He squeezed back. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. Sutton raised her wineglass slightly, the liquid catching the light. "So here's to Pamela," she said, her smile wide and fake and poisonous, to my perfect sister and her perfect life. The crowd murmured, appreciation, glasses raising in response. But I sat there watching, waiting for the moment when the melatonin would hit full force. Waiting for karma to strike. Waiting for my sister to fall. The applause for my speech was still echoing through the ballroom. When Sutton raised her wineglass high, that practiced smile stretched across her face. She delivered her performance flawlessly. The loving sister, the gracious bridesmaid, the picture of family unity. But I knew better. I'd always known better. To my sister and her new husband. She announced, her voice carrying that theatrical lilt she'd perfected for her Instagram videos. "May your marriage be everything. Mine will be someday." The crowd murmured their approval. Sterling's hand found mine under the table, his fingers warm and steady. I watched Sutton bring the crystal flute to her lips. My original glass, the one she'd so carefully doctored, and take a long, triumphant sip. The transformation wasn't immediate. She lowered the glass, still smiling, still playing her part. But then I saw it. The slight wobble in her stance, the way her free hand reached for the podium as if the floor had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. "Thank you all," for her words slurred at the edges. She blinked rapidly, her eyelids growing heavy. The crystal flute trembled in her grip. Adeline leaned close to me, her voice barely a whisper. "How much did she use? How much did she use?" "I don't know," I murmured back. "But judging by how fast it's hitting her, a lot more than the recommended dose." She swayed visibly now, her knuckles white as she gripped the microphone stand. The entire ballroom had gone quiet. 300 guests watching as my sister's carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time.
"Why?"
Her voice cracked through the speakers, confused and frightened. "Why is the ceiling spinning?" The wineglass slipped from her fingers first. It tumbled through the air in what felt like slow-motion crystal, catching the light before it shattered against the stage floor. The sound was sharp, final like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Then Sutton's legs gave out completely. She pitched forward, her right hand still clutching the microphone in a death grip, as if that slim piece of metal could somehow anchor her to consciousness. Her body moved with the terrible weight of dead gravity. No attempt to catch herself. No protective instinct left in her drug system. The impact was catastrophic.
Boom.
6 tiers of red velvet wedding cake. $8,500 worth of artisanal perfection. Each layer, carefully crafted with gold leaf details and delicate sugar flowers, exploded on contact. Sutton's face hit first, then her entire torso. Her $1,800 bridesmaid dress plunging into the destruction like a diver entering water. Except instead of water, there was buttercream frosting, cake crumbs, and the deep crimson interior of red velvet layers. The visual was horrifying. White cream mixing with red cake created something that looked disturbingly like a crime scene. My sister lay motionless in the wreckage. Her platinum blonde hair matted with frosting. Her ivory dress now stained beyond recognition. It looked like she'd been destroyed violently in front of 300 witnesses. My mother's scream pierced the air. Sutton. But Sterling was already moving. His doctor's training kicked in before anyone else could even process what had happened. He was on the stage in seconds, his tuxedo forgotten as he dropped to his knees beside the cake wreckage. "Someone cut the music," he commanded, his voice calm but absolute. The jazz quartet fell silent immediately. Sterling worked fast, his hands moving with professional precision. He grabbed Sutton's shoulder and firmly rolled her onto her side to clear her airway, wiping the thick layer of buttercream from her nose and mouth. I watched my husband check her pulse at her neck, then lift her eyelids to examine her pupils, his expression growing darker with each assessment. The entire ballroom held its breath. David stood frozen at the head table. Eleanor had her hand pressed to her heart. My father was pushing through the crowd, his face pale. The movement of being rolled over seemed to jolt Sutton. Her hand was still wrapped around the microphone, the wireless device dragging across her chin as Sterling positioned her in her delirium. Her eyes flickered open, unfocused, unseeing. She looked directly at Sterling, but I could tell she wasn't really seeing him.
No.
The word came out broken, barely audible, but the microphone, now resting right near her lips, picked it up perfectly. Her voice echoed through the ballroom speakers, distorted and weak. Ron glass, the drug glass. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Time seemed to freeze. Every single person in that ballroom had heard it. The words were slurred, confused but unmistakable.
Ron. Glass.
Drug glass. The implication was inescapable. Sterling's hand stilled. He raised his head slowly, his gaze moving from Sutton's unconscious form to where my parents now stood at the edge of the stage. His expression was cold, colder than I'd ever seen it. "She isn't having a stroke," he said, each word precise and clinical. "This is a synergistic toxicity. Alcohol potentiated a central nervous system depressant. These are classic symptoms of a sedative overdose." My mother made a choking sound.
What? No.
"That's not." She wouldn't. Sterling pulled out his phone and called 911, briefly explaining the situation to the dispatcher using medical terminology before hanging up. My father finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous. Sutton would never. There must be some mistake." Sterling ended the call and stood towering over both my parents. The look he gave them could have frozen fire. "You two will go to the hospital with her. I won't call the police tonight." He paused, and I saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. "But if anything else happens, if there's even one more incident, I can't promise that." Same courtesy. The threat was clear. My father, who'd spent my entire life bulldozing over everyone with his opinions and demands, actually stepped back. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, completely silenced by Sterling's absolute authority. The ambulance arrived within minutes, the advantage of being in downtown Charleston. The paramedics loaded Sutton onto a gurney, her face still smeared with frosting and cake crumbs, her dress ruined beyond repair. My mother climbed into the ambulance without a word, her face twisted in that familiar expression of martyred suffering. My father lingered at the ballroom entrance, looking back at me with something I couldn't quite read. Accusation. Guilt.
Fear.
I met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away, refusing to give him the comfort of my submission. Then he was gone, and the ambulance pulled away into the Charleston night. The ballroom was chaos, guests murmuring and shocked clusters, hotel staff frozen in uncertainty. The destroyed cake, a crimson monument to the evening's disaster. I stood at the head table, Sterling's hand in mine, and felt something unexpected wash over me. Relief.
Pure.
Uncomplicated relief. Adeline appeared at my side, her phone held up like a trophy. I recorded the whole thing. She announced her criminal lawyer instincts, sharp as ever. Both the fall and the confession. Audio is crystal clear. She tapped the screen and Sutton's drugged voice played back. "Ron glass, the drug glass." Several nearby guests heard it. The whispers intensified. I watched the truth ripple through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. My sister, the golden child, the beloved youngest daughter, had just confessed to attempted poisoning in front of 300 witnesses. The hunter had become the prey. Eleanor approached us, her Oscar de la Renta gown somehow still immaculate despite the chaos. She looked at the destroyed cake, then at me, her expression unreadable. "Well," she said, finally, a hint of dry amusement in her voice. "This is certainly the most memorable wedding I've ever attended." The hotel manager materialized, wringing his hands. "Mrs. Ashford, I am so terribly sorry about this incident. Should we end the reception, given the circumstances?" I looked at the ruined cake, red velvet crumbs scattered across the stage like evidence of violence. White frosting smeared across the floor. The beautiful 6-tier masterpiece reduced to rubble. $8,500 worth of destroyed artistry. And all I felt was light. I turned to Sterling. His blue eyes searched mine, concerned, but not pitying. "How are you doing?" he asked quietly. "This is the first time I've seen you breathe easy since we got engaged," he said before I could answer. He was right. For months I've been walking on eggshells, managing my family's expectations, trying to prevent exactly this kind of scene. I'd paid for Sutton's dress, included her in every detail, bent over backward to keep the peace. And she tried to drug me anyway.
But now
Now the monster had been driven away. I looked at the hotel manager and smiled a real smile. Not the practiced one I'd been wearing all night. "Clean it up. Bring out more wine and whatever desserts the hotel has in the kitchen. The night has only just begun." The manager blinked. You want to continue? "This is my wedding reception," I said firmly, "and I'm going to celebrate with the people who actually care about me." Something shifted in the room after that. The guests who'd come out of obligation, my parents, friends, the society matrons who'd attended for appearances, made their quiet exits. But the people who remained, they were ours. Sterling's medical school colleagues, my work friends Adeline and David, Eleanor, and the family members who'd actually taken the time to know us. The jazz quartet started playing again. The hotel brought out trays of chocolate, tortoise, and lemon tarts. Someone opened more champagne, without the weight of my family's judgment hanging over everything. The reception transformed into something genuine. I danced with Sterling under the chandeliers, his arms around my waist, and felt the tension I'd been carrying for years. Finally, release.
no regrets?
"No," he murmured against my hair. "None," I said, and meant it. Adeline caught my eye from across the dance floor, raising her champagne flute in a silent toast. She'd been warning me about my family for years. Tonight, she'd been proven right in the most spectacular way possible. The next morning, sunlight streaming through the hotel's suite windows, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How could you let this happen? Sutton only did it because she felt left out. She felt pressured seeing you enter such a wealthy family. She made a mistake. You need to forgive her. Family is family." I read it twice, feeling the familiar guilt. Try to take root. The old Pamela, the one who'd spent 29 years trying to earn her parents' love, would have replied, would have apologized, would have found a way to make it her fault, but that Pamela had died somewhere between the glass swap and the cake destruction. I deleted the message without responding. Then I blocked the number. Sterling watched me from the bed, understanding without asking. "You okay?"
Yeah.
I said, and realized it was true. "I really am." I blocked my father's number. Next. Then Sutton's one by one. I cut the threads that had bound me to their toxicity for my entire life. No more money transfers to cover Sutton's debts. No more guilt trip phone calls. No more playing the role of the disappointing daughter. Freedom tasted like the Charleston morning air. Salty and clean. 1 year later, Sterling took me to a prenatal checkup at Charleston Medical. I was 8 months along, my belly round and firm under my sundress. The ultrasound technician smiled as she moved the wand across my skin. "Everything looks perfect," she said. "Your baby girl is healthy and growing right on schedule. A daughter." Sterling's hand tightened around mine, his eyes bright with unshared tears. We talked about this moment for months, about the kind of parents we wanted to be, the kind of family we wanted to create. "No, golden child," I said quietly, echoing the promise we'd made to each other. "Every child equal." Sterling agreed. Always. We drove home through the historic district, past the antebellum homes and oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. My phone, new number, new contact sat silent in my purse. My mother had tried to reach out through mutual acquaintances, leaving messages about wanting to make amends and be part of her grandchild's life. I hadn't responded. Some bridges, once burned, should stay. Ashes. That evening, I sat on our back porch with my laptop, composing a post for the online forum where I'd been documenting my story. The wedding disaster had been too spectacular to keep completely private. Strong opinions. I need your thoughts on a few things I typed because my family still won't leave me alone, and I want outside perspectives. Question 1. Was I too harsh for swapping the glasses? My mother says a good sister would have just poured the wine away instead of letting Sutton harm herself. Question 2. Sutton destroyed an $8,500 cake. Should I sue her in civil court for compensation? Or just consider it tuition fees for her life lesson? Question 3. Do you agree with me that it's better to lose $8,500 to get rid of toxic people than to preserve a fake, perfect wedding? Please leave a comment. I hit post and closed the laptop. Inside, Sterling was cooking dinner, humming along to jazz music through the window. I could see him moving around our kitchen, our home, our life built on honesty instead of manipulation. My daughter kicked a firm little flutter against my ribs. I pressed my hand to the spot, feeling the miracle of new life, new beginnings. The wedding cake had been destroyed. The bridesmaid dress ruined, my family ties severed, and I had never been happier. The monster was gone. The cage was open, and I was finally completely free.
Subscribe.